All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Tech Tools training today. Today, we will be covering Microsoft Intune. I have a quick PowerPoint that will eventually present here. There we go. So I'm going to go over Intune. Intune is very in-depth. So I'm going to try to cover everything at a high level on how to get started with it. So I'm your host. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Center Technologies. My name is Todd Smith. And if you haven't joined the webinar yet, feel free to use the question and answer or to post questions so we can answer them throughout the webinar. I'd like this to be interactive. It's weird when everyone's muted and I can't see faces. So if you at least post some questions, I'd love to cover them for you. We also have a YouTube channel where this will be posted and other trainings. If you're on YouTube, you can search Center Technologies or youtube.com/@centertechs. So what is Intune? Yes, I'm going to get as granular starting with that. It's a cloud-based solution for managing mobile devices or workstations, applications, streamlining IT operations. You can do some security compliance. You can require devices have certain security compliance and settings enabled. It's a centralized management portal, so you can manage those devices, apps, policies. It does require specific licensing to utilize. So it's included, the Microsoft license is included in M365, E3, E5, F1, F3, and also Business Premium. I underline Business Premium because that is probably the best license, especially if you're under 300 users, to utilize, because it includes a whole lot of different security products as well as Intune. It is also included in Enterprise Mobility and Security, E3 and E5. They also have standalone licensing. There's a Plan 1, which is typically for per user per device. Plan 2 and Intune Suite. I'm not going to get into a lot of the features of the Plan 2 and Intune Suite because they're not typically included in Business Premium. Most clients don't have those. There's a whole lot of other features available in those. So part of Intune, there's a feature called Autopilot. So it's really just designed to simplify the deployment process of new devices to users. So that in traditional model, you send it, order a device, send it to IT. IT would then, have an image a golden image that they'd have to maintain, which could be a problem. You'd have to maintain different driver packages, push it to devices. By the time you deploy it, a new device comes in, your image is outdated. Not only that, then you have to ship the device to the user, depending on where they are. So Autopilot helps simplify that. You could literally order a device from someone like Center and have it shipped from the distributor straight to the end user. There are some requirements for that to work. But then the user, when they get the out-of-box experience, they select they connect it to the network. So they choose their language, connect to the network. And then if it's set up properly, the device will, part of the out-of-box experience, what it's doing, whether a user realizes or not, when you connect to the network, it sees if that hardware token is associated with an Intune tenant, if it's set up in Autopilot. If so, it'll automatically enroll the device in Entra, enroll the device in Intune, and then apply whatever policies that you have set. It can be a pain to set this up unless you have a partner like Center Technologies, to where if you wanted to add the devices in Autopilot, you'd have to have the make, model, serial number, and a hardware token, which you would have to get from the distributor, which typically is an extra fee, or you'd have to physically have the device, run a PowerShell script, and pull that in. Because we are a Microsoft partner, all we need is the make, model, serial number, and we can import those for you. Once they're imported, we can assign a profile, assign a user. So once the device is shipped to that user, it will set it up exactly how you'd like. And this is kind of just going over what I mentioned. There are other options. I'm not going to get into those today, but you can install an Intune AD connector. And what that would allow to where if you still have a hybrid environment where you're cloud and on-prem and the devices have to be AD enrolled, if using an Intune AD connector, you can actually have the device, even if it's at someone's house, enroll in Active Directory, and it creates an offline domain join. So that is an option. There are some limitations when you do a hybrid join. So if you don't have to have the devices enrolled in AD, it's recommended by Microsoft to not do that. You can still have a hybrid environment, still have a domain controller that replicates with 365, but if the device doesn't have to be enrolled in AD, it's recommended to do cloud only, Entra join. So other things I've kind of mentioned, other features. So application deployment is one that's very nice in Intune. Another thing that you can do with it, though, you can make some apps optional. So something like Notepad++. You may not want to deploy that to all users, but you may want it available. Or Adobe Reader, things like that, to where you don't have to deploy it with Intune right away. You can make them optional. And if you deploy a company portal app, which we recommend doing, and one of the things I'll cover today, it would allow the users to open the company portal app, pick an application, and actually install it themselves without requiring local admin. So it's pre-approved and it deploys via Intune. They're just choosing the option to do it. If there's a required application, and let's say they're having an issue with it, the user could actually reinstall the application themselves through the company portal. Some other features, you can do remote wipe or autopilot reset. So that way, if a device is stolen, you can send a remote wipe. So if it ever connects to the internet again, it would wipe it versus allowing the user to, or the thief to try to log into the device. And it can also do compliance checks. Part of what's nice about that is you can create a conditional access policy that would require the device that the user's logging into be compliant in order to log into an application or your entire 365 tenant. So if there's some business critical application that needs to be really secure, you could make it to where the device has to be enrolled into and has to be compliant. Otherwise, they will not be able to log into it. So it adds another layer of security. So there are some challenges. I see a question. Let me get to that. So wipe the device or work profile on the cell phone. Yes, you have options for that. It depends on if it is a corporate phone or personal device, depending on how you have it set up. You should be able to do both, either or. It all depends on how Intune is set up, but you do have the capability to just wipe the work profile on the device, or you could wipe the entire thing. So the challenge with Windows laptops, though, so a lot of today I'm going to focus on the Windows side. In the future, we will likely have one that focuses on mobile devices. The challenge with Windows is obviously not every device is always going to be connected to a network, unless it has like a 4G card or cell card in it. Go back to the challenge. So unless they connect it to their wireless somehow or hardwired plug it in, it's going to be a challenge that it actually gets wiped. But through Intune, you can require BitLocker and encrypt the OS, so it's difficult for them to try to pull any data off of it. So at least you have the peace of mind where if they try to connect it to network, it can wipe it, or you have BitLocker that encrypts the hard drive. So the only thing they could do at that point is wipe it and reinstall the operating system. So there are some challenges with Intune. I want to make sure people are aware of those. And a lot of those challenges are really because of the architecture it was built on. So it is not a real-time service. So it has scheduled intervals where it checks in. So initially it's every 15 minutes, and then it'll start going to every 8 hours, 24 hours. There's different things that it'll, different periods where it checks certain things to look for if there's any updates, and then also report status back. So that's one important thing to note, is that it is not real time. You can try to force it to sync. You can restart services. You can create scheduled tasks that try to have it sync and check in more often. It's just not designed to do that. So any change you make in Intune, again, may not be reflected on the device immediately or in real time. Scripts, applications, things like that aren't going to be real time. It's going to be at check-in. So that's where something like a remote monitoring management tool, an RMM tool, such as what Center utilizes today, which is ConnectWise Automate, that does allow for real-time monitoring and automation. And so it can work in tandem with Intune. So enough PowerPoint, let's dive in. So let me stop sharing this. And I have a demo tenant that I'm going to log in with here. All right. So this is Center Demo Tenant 2025. When you first log in to 365, assuming you have the appropriate licensing, let's just assume you have Business Premium, which is what this tenant has. One of the first steps that you'd want to make sure of, you'd want to go to, it's under Identity, but Entra, and check your device settings. Because depending on your Intune and Autopilot policy, you're going to want to allow the user to enroll the device into Entra. And so before you push the policy out, before you start utilizing it, you want to make sure that setting is allowed. So if you go in Entra, devices, all devices, device settings, you can choose whether or not you want all users to be able to join devices to Microsoft Entra or selected group. Obviously, you could choose selected, pick a group. I'm going to leave this for all for now. We often, depending on the environment, that you can have some challenges. In the past, we have seen where there's some challenges to where the device doesn't enroll properly with MFA because the user still has to enroll in MFA. They may have fixed that. For this particular tenant, we have it set to no, to where I haven't tried it out recently, but if you do experience issues enrolling devices, I would recommend setting it to no, but you might want to leave it enabled until you have issues, because I would imagine they'd fix it by now. In this particular case with this demo tenant, we have it set to no. There's some other things that you can do from this page as well. So obviously the global administrator role is going to be added as a local admin. You can select that no. That's a new setting. That's why it's preview. In the past, it was required 100%. And then you can also add additional users to be a local admin. We don't recommend everyone that you make a standard user local admin. That's why we have things like Auto Elevate, which we've covered. But you do have the ability to either select it to where everyone is a local admin or selected group. So let's say you have a help desk where you want those users to be able to log into the machines as an admin if needed. You could do that and pick those users or group. For now, I'm going to select no. And there is another option which we may focus if we have time. I'm going to go ahead and enable LAPS, which is Local Administrative Password Solution. What that would do is allow, you can create a policy so that the local admin account, whether you create a separate one or the built-in administrator account, you can have it to where it cycles the password, where it's unique per device. So you don't have to worry about somebody getting that password somehow and being able to access every single device as a local admin. You can have it to where it cycles, I believe, as low as every 7 days, and it saves that password to active or to Entra and to Intune, to where if you needed to use that account for any reason, you could access that password and log in with it. However, we do, if you're a co-managed service client, managed service client, that's where Auto Elevate can come in handy because it allows just-in-time local admin. But this is also an option because let's say the device is not able to connect to the network and you may need to give that password to a remote user for any reason. You could, and then it would automatically reset, or you could reset it manually, but you have that available to you. The next thing that I want to do to get started is create some groups. And I would recommend creating these. I've already pre-created them here. So one of them is going to be Intune Autopilot devices. This is a dynamic group, and I'll put the rule syntax in here in the chat. Let's see, this is what I'd recommend calling it, which is Intune Autopilot devices. And then the query is this. So what this does is if the device is enrolled in, and I can show you where that's done, but if it is enrolled in Autopilot, it would automatically join this group. So that way, if there's certain policy settings, apps that you want deployed to that particular group, you could do so. Another group, there's two other ones, really three. Another one is just Intune devices. When you create that, you would just create a security group. You don't have to add members right away. That's another one I would recommend creating. And then the others are Intune device prep users and device prep devices. Now it seems kind of redundant for some of these, but these two are for very specific use cases, which is a new enrollment, a new way to enroll devices, which I can cover today. So we have some time, which we should. So these three, there's no query or anything. You just create the group and you can populate them later if needed. The device prep users, what this one would be is if you want a user to be able to enroll a device that is not already pre-enrolled in Autopilot, but let's say it's out of box, they go purchase a business class device. It has to be a business OS. It can't be a home OS. You don't have time to enroll in Autopilot, but you want them to be able to enroll it and get the policies. You would want to be able to add the users to this group. And then there's a whole nother profile that we could push, which is called device preparation profile. And so I'll cover that today as well. That's a little newer. That wasn't available last year. But that would allow those users on a business class device that's been wiped or net new out of box experience to enroll the device without having to already have it pre-enrolled in Autopilot. The next thing we're going to do is some checks and setup here in Intune. So again, if you go to admin.microsoft.com, select Intune, or just go to intune.microsoft.com. It'll pull up the Intune management. So if I go to devices, enrollment, I'm going to check the automatic enrollment. So the other setting we checked in Entra was Entra enrollment to make sure which group users, if all or a specific group, could join Entra. This is going to be with Intune. So if you wanted to restrict this, you could select that and it would go to a specific group, or it would limit it to a specific group, or I could do it for all. I'm going to leave it for all. I'm not going to change any of these settings. I'm going to leave the default so that everything works. If you know what you're doing, you can change those. Don't recommend it. Leave the Microsoft settings. The next thing you're going to want to do is check for CNAME validation. And so you're going to need CNAME records on your domain. So for this tenant, it is an on Microsoft account. So that's what I'm going to check. So if I put this in my domain, so that for this, you would want to put your actual domain. So center.tech or centertechnologies.com is what we put for ours, and we'll see if the records are created. These are the CNAME records that are needed. So basically, when the device is trying to enroll in Intune, it's looking for those. So enterprise enrollment and enterprise registration, and then next to that is the value so that it will actually be able to enroll. So you have to make sure that those are in place. Otherwise, the device may not be able to enroll. I'm not going to go into co-management solutions, but I'm going to look at the device enrollment restrictions. So you have some different options here to where who can enroll a device and what type of device they're able to enroll. If I select this, it'll allow me to drill in. So all users, I can make some changes here if I needed to. So for the platform settings, this is where you can say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to allow personal devices. So that way I know when there's a device being added. The challenge with this can be if you want to allow iPhones to be enrolled and they're not already pre-enrolled in Apple Business Manager. This may be restricted. So you may have to come in here and allow it later. Or if you don't have Autopilot set up correctly and you're trying to enroll a device in Intune, it may not know it's a corporate device unless you have certain identifiers set up. So you may have to come back here and allow it temporarily. So this is where you would change that platform. This is going to be the corporate. That used to say corporate. And then this is the personal devices. So if it's not already pre-enrolled in Autopilot, Apple Business Manager, then, or you don't have the corporate identifier set up, then it would come in as a personal device, but you can change it later. Because there are different restrictions, especially on Apple, to where if the device comes in as a personal device, there's certain settings that it cannot control. So for this example, I'm going to leave those to allow personal. And let's go back to enrollment. The devices. You can also limit how many devices somebody could enroll for any reason. So let's say a device gets compromised or user account gets compromised. They can't sit there and just go create a bunch of different, enroll a bunch of different accounts for whatever reason. It used to be 5. It looks like they've made the default now 15. And then you can set up some enrollment notifications. So for example, I think for Centers, I've set it up to where, let's say the user goes in to log into their new device and they might walk away because it can take a little bit of time. I have it to where it sends an email when it's completed. So that way they see it, and then you can put other information in there. So for instance, it says your device is ready to use, the device has successfully been enrolled using Autopilot and Intune, run Windows updates, you can access your apps here. So you can put whatever information you need. For instance, contact center, if you have any issues. So that's something that you can set up there. Also, Windows Hello, if you want to allow the users, especially on Entra join devices, you can have it to where they're able to log in using their face. Save. So what this does, depending on who you ask and what day, this can be considered MFA, because in order to set this up initially, the person has to have their password. They likely utilized MFA to initially log into the device. And then once you have this set up, this is kind of like their a second form of authentication. It does allow and require a PIN. So if some reason the facial recognition doesn't work, they use the PIN. So in theory, if somebody would have to have the password and the PIN and or the face to log in. But I know depending on certain compliance and depending on who you ask, this may not be sufficient enough for a secondary form of authentication for the device. If you ask Microsoft, it is. So I'm going to come back to this Windows Autopilot device preparation. This is what I was saying is newer. It doesn't require a device to be enrolled in Autopilot. However, let's see. So what I mentioned earlier, you can import your own devices. When you do that, it will tell you exactly what is needed. There are scripts that you can run to pull the and get the hardware hash ID, and you can upload that CSV. Also have it now set up to where let's see, you can have it prompt to log into 365 when you run the PowerShell script and actually do the enrollment through that as well. Or contact center, we can enroll it. When you enroll a device, I should have enrolled one. All you have to do, you would check, you have the serial numbers here. You can have a group tags. So when you import the CSV, you can give it a group tag. Let's say you're purchasing an order for the sale of laptops for the sales team. You could give it sales as the group tag. Then you could actually create custom dynamic groups that look for devices with that group tag and have certain things applied to them. When you check it and assign the user, you choose what user that is going to be logging in, and then also you can give it a name at that point in time. Otherwise, you can create a deployment profile and give it a name at this point. So for the deployment profile, I already created one just to make it a little easier, but so for this one, I'm just going to call it Autopilot Profile. I'm going to convert targeted devices to Autopilot. They're not already registered. Yes. Next thing is I'm going to configure the out-of-box experience. So just so the user doesn't have to accept the license terms or view that, I can hide it. I can hide the privacy settings. One thing to note with this, when you hide them, it actually, unless they've changed it recently, it prevents the OS from using location, which can be a challenge for setting time zones. So in some cases, you might want to show that and allow the user to choose. The other thing, going to hide the account options. And then this is where you can also have it to where when they enroll the device into Intune, how does it enroll them? Is it administrator, standard user? We recommend doing standard user. If you do select administrator, we absolutely recommend removing it later. I'm going to make this standard. Allow pre-provisioned deployment. I'm actually going to select yes to this. What this does is, let's say you have 10 devices and you want to make it a little easier to deploy for the end user. Or let's say you just have one device and you don't want them to have to sit there for 30 minutes, 45 minutes for first login to apply all the settings, download all the apps. What you could do is allow pre-provisioned deployment. So let's say you power up the device, the user's not there yet. You can hit the Windows key 5 times when it gets to the out-of-box experience. It'll go pull the Autopilot profile, Autopilot information, and it'll look for all system and device level configurations and apps and apply those. So then when the user logs in, it's just applying the application policies and applications. So it does make it a little faster for the end user if you already have the device before they're logging in for the first time. You can pre-select the language, automatically configure keyboard. Yes, so that way it uses whatever the language is. And then you can, this is where you can apply a device name template. So for example, for this demo account, let's say our naming convention is dem for demo. We like to do LT for laptop, or I'm sorry, we like to do the location next. So what you could do, if you have the naming convention as part of the location, when you upload those devices into Autopilot, you can give it a tag specific to that application, or I'm sorry, to that location. And you could have a different profile apply to the dynamic groups based on location. For this, I'm just going to act like it's a Houston one, laptop. The challenge with using serial, and I wish Microsoft would change this, is that it's going to ignore the 15 character limit in some cases, and it'll make a very long host name. Some services will only see a host name as the 15 characters. So for example, ConnectWise Automate, a lot of other services will only see first 15 characters. Other applications may see the extra characters. So when you're trying to do a comparison, they look like two different devices and really they're the same one. So if it's a Surface, I absolutely would not do serial number if you're applying anything else in the naming convention, because those serial numbers alone are 15 characters. So if you're going to use a Surface, you want it to be a serial number, just do serial. Otherwise, unless you know, like if it's a Dell, I think those are what, 6 or 8 characters. you want to make sure that whatever this ends up being is not over 15 characters. One thing that we like to do is we'll use random and allow it to generate a random number. If I do this and I can put in the number for 4 characters, %, it'll generate a random number up to that number of characters. At some point, I hope they allow you to cut it off or make changes or add something else in. I'm going to go with this for now. Whenever you apply or assign the user an autopilot, you actually have the ability to name the device at that point in time. So when they go to log in, it'll actually be that name. That takes priority over this as far as naming convention. But let's say someone forgets to do that, you at least want it to have it some kind of standard name. That's where this can come in. All right. Next thing we're going to do is go to a status page, or create a status page, sorry. Default one I'm going to adjust. So I like to show the progress. So that way they can at least see where it's at and how many more steps there are available. Depending on bandwidth, it may time out. If you have this more than 60 or if they're having issues for a reason, I'd recommend bumping it up. We typically do 120. You can have it show a custom error message if something happens, if there's an error, if the time limit's exceeded. So let's say they're just somewhere where the internet's really bad, or there's an issue with an app deployment that's actually taking it a long time. You can have it post a message, who to contact if something happens. I'd recommend leaving these enabled. For the block device use until the apps and profiles are assigned. If you say yes, you may want to specify which apps. Otherwise, it could take a while, and the experience for the end user may be poor. It may just take a lot longer. However, if you say, hey, only block it until these core apps are installed. So we'll come back to this after we can set up an app. So like Office, your antivirus, something along those lines, our ConnectWise Automate agent. You could have it at least assign block use until those are done. That would at least allow the user to log in after those are completed, and it can finish installing the rest of the applications in the background. You can also tell it to reset if there's an issue with the installation, or whether or not you want to allow the user to use the device if an error occurs. So let's say we typically would say no, but let's say you have an issue and a lot of users are starting to experience a problem, you could allow yes until you figure out why the deployment's taking a while. So we typically recommend selecting the apps. But again, I'll come back to that once we have an application. You could say, no, just allow them to use it as soon as possible and it'll start deploying everything in the background. Challenge with that, when we first deployed this a couple of years ago or a few years ago, I told the user, hey, it was a remote user. I said, you're our test subject. Don't install anything after you log in. Because I didn't have that set. Well, the first thing they did was try to install Office themselves, and it didn't get our deployment, so then it errored on that. So it was just off to a bad start. Because it didn't do the Intune deployment, it showed failed, it looked like they didn't have Office. So definitely recommend at least restricting it to your core apps are deployed. And then also that way they don't have, something malicious before the antivirus software gets deployed. So next, we're going to do some configurations. So I'm going to create some here. These are built in this demo tenant. But I'm going to create a few that we normally will do. So for example, one of these is going to be OneDrive. One second, make sure I have it. So for OneDrive, use platform. This is going to be Windows 10. Use the settings catalog. Some point this may load. There we go. I'm going to give it a name. So I call this OneDrive sync and backup. So what I'd like to do is make sure that our desktop documents, you can do images if you like, but at least their documents folder is backing up and syncing with OneDrive. Benefit of that is, let's say the user's having an issue or they get their laptop stolen, they can get a new machine, they have their core documents that aren't saved in OneDrive or aren't saved in SharePoint or on the network somewhere. Or if you need to do an autopilot reset, or wipe the device for any reason, reset the device for any reason, they at least have their core documents. Then you typically would have the applications deploying through Intune, so you can refresh and reimage the machine a lot faster without worrying about the user losing documents. You just gotta make sure you tell them, do not save outside of your documents, SharePoint, on the network, something along those lines. So for this, make it easy, I can search OneDrive. I have a lot of different settings here. I am going to enable sync health reporting for OneDrive. So this way I can actually make sure it's happening and actually view a report. Without that enabled, you don't get that data. Prevent user from redirecting their Windows known folders to their PC. So that way they can't disable it. They can't disable documents from redirecting to OneDrive. It's going to do it no matter what. The next is I want it, let's say it's an existing machine, I can have it silently move those known folders to OneDrive. And now I can choose which. Those are two settings. There we go. So desktop documents. It's everything. Yeah. Okay, and then I can go change that there. This looks different. I don't know why they have two. Just like Microsoft, they always have new settings every time I'm looking. And then the other thing I'd recommend is, especially if it's enrolled in, if the device is Entra enrolled, is silently sign in users to the OneDrive app using their Windows credentials. And then the other thing is use OneDrive files on demand. So one good thing, if you're partner with Center, if we have a GDAP relationship with you, we have a lot of pre-canned policies that we can push and make your life a lot easier. I'm going to create these today, but we do have the ability to push these policies. We can have it to where they're not assigned, so you have the ability to look at them first before they get assigned, so that way you're not having to go reinvent the wheel and recreate all of these. All right, so now I actually have to enable them. This just gives me this, adds the settings to this policy. This is where I can choose device, desktop, pictures. You may or may not want to do pictures. Show the user, no, not going to notify them. Tenant ID. So this, if you're not sure where this is, you can make sure that your tenant is the one that this is set up for. All you have to do is go to entra.microsoft.com. Your tenant ID is right here. I can populate that. I'm going to prevent the user from redirecting on their own, and I'm going to enable the report so I can view this information to see if their data is actually syncing correctly. I'm not going to apply any scope tags, but assignments. So this is where you can apply it to very specific users or devices. In this particular, the device would be all users on that machine, or you can just do all users. For this, I am going to set this to device. Make sure, come on. Add all devices. You can also do filters. So let's say you do have corporate devices or personal devices, and you don't want to enable this for personal. You could create a filter for just corporate devices. And instead of having to create a whole new group, you could create a filter for corporate devices only, edit the filter, tell it to include corporate devices, or the reverse, you could exclude personal devices. So that's something that we typically recommend doing as well. And so to show you what that looks like, so I'm going to create this and I'll come back and adjust that. So I'm going to go create a filter. Assignment filters, here we go. So personal devices. So I'm going to create one for manage device, personal devices, Windows, and the rule syntax is literally the device ownership equals personal. So the property device ownership equals personal. So you can adjust this however which way. So let's say that you have a filter. You don't want to create a group for everything. You can create filters for specific device names. So let's say, or I'm sorry, manufacturer. So let's say you want to make sure Dell Support Assist or Dell Command Update gets deployed to all the Dell devices. You could create a filter that's specific to Dell in here. For this, I'm going to create that for personal. And I'm going to go ahead and create another one for corporate. Edit the syntax here. Just change this to corporate. If you're not sure what to put in some of these fields for any kind of filter or dynamic group, what's very helpful is actually viewing an existing device. So here's one that I've already enrolled. I could go view what my options are. So device ownership, my options are either personal, corporate, or unknown. Or let's say manufacturer. That one can be a challenge because it has to be the exact format. I can't just put Microsoft unless I change it to contains versus equals. So if you look at an existing machine, it allows you to know what data to put for those filters. So let me go back to configuration for OneDrive. This. Edit the assignment. And this is where I am going to exclude personal devices. I could also do include corporate. Just depends. Go. So now, any personal device, if it joins, it's not going to sync and back up their personal documents on that device. So another policy that we'll typically create is BitLocker OS encryption. And you can do this a number of which ways. So they also, this can get confusing. We've seen a client that had all kinds of BitLocker issues, and it was because one team was they had endpoint security. So you can do some policies here. So whether it's disk encryption, you can create a policy here. You can create a security baseline that has encryption policies. You need to pick one and stick with it, because otherwise they can conflict and you're not sure which policy is actually applying, and that can cause problems. And so one of the ones we have, just because it's a lot easier for us to import for our clients, is we're actually going to do this under configuration. So I'm going to create a new policy, Windows 10. Stuff as a reference. And again, this is something we can import as a template for you. Second. Yeah, let's go back. So enable BitLocker encryption for OS drives. Encryption. Go. Windows encryption. All right. And this is why I like templates. Keep it back. Not looking the same. Interesting. One more time. BitLocker. It would help if I could spell. There we go. Encryption. It still looks different. That's interesting. Not sure why it's not giving me the same options. Forgive me. Next time I'll just import the template and go first. Let's try this again. Here we go. Operating system drives. Oh, I apologize. I am going over. I was thinking it was until 1. So I'll create this one real quick. Actually, let me come back to this. Let me do an application because I know we are over on time. But I can come in here and select the properties I want to require encryption. Next, let me go to apps. There are some pre-canned applications. So for example, if it's a Windows Store app, I would recommend checking to see if the app you're looking for is in here first. One of the ones I always recommend is, again, I mentioned it earlier, the company portal. This is where you can determine if it's installed at the user level, system level. I'm going to do system. What kind of category? This is for organizational purposes. I'm going to say computer management. Leave the logo blank. I can come back and populate that later. This is where you can choose all devices. If you can want to filter it or not. I'm going to filter to exclude personal. Another thing you can do, so you can make it available for enrolled devices. Some reason if it doesn't get installed, you could, or just any application in general, this is where you can say, if they go to the company portal, this is where, if you assign it here, that's how they can go find the app and deploy it themselves. For this application, I'm not going to show the toast notification. So the system tray, the pop-up that comes up, whether or not you want the user to see it. I am going to do it when they deploy it themselves. So that's a lot faster and easier than it used to be, especially for the store apps. Other ones you can do are, let's do Microsoft 365 really quick. Which apps do you want to deploy? Not going to do Skype for Business. You can deploy other apps, whether it's Project or Visio, if you have those licenses, file format, open XML, update channel, current channel. Nope, I'm sorry. I want to do the monthly enterprise channel. So that way it'll make sure it gets updated and it's going to be the latest version. I can have it remove other versions. That's helpful to where if it's an existing device and you're deploying it to Intune, you can make sure if it's an old volume license, this would actually uninstall it and deploy the latest. Shared user computer activation. Let's say it is an AVD that is a multi-user AVD. You would want to make sure this is specific, this deployment. If this is yes, you want to make sure that this is only assigned to those particular devices and you have the proper licensing for that. So no. Yes, I'm going to accept the terms for the user, and then what language? English. What am I missing? This is fun. It's not letting me go forward. Why not? There we go. All right, sorry. Office open document format. There we go. All right, and this is going to say all devices. Great. So for some applications, depending on how you're deploying them, it may take a few minutes, especially if you are uploading an installer. We'll likely host another Intune webinar, especially I didn't get as far as I was wanting today, to where we can show how to create packaged apps using MSIs or executables. And we can go over the other method for enrolling using a device preparation policy. I apologize. I was hoping we'd get to that today. And we can do a test deployment to a machine. Some other things that are helpful, scripts. So let's say there's a PowerShell script that you want to run. All you have to do is come in here and you would upload your PowerShell script. You have a lot of different options there. The note, some notes for the scripts. It will only run the one time unless there's a change. So it's not going to run continuously like a login script. It's just a one-time script deployment. There are other license requirements, and you can do remediations. I'm not going to cover that because, again, this was for Business Premium. Remediations, though, do allow you to look for certain conditions with a certain discovery script or detection script, and then a remediation. Hey, if this event happens, and I'm going to check this daily, then do this event. Let's see some other helpful tips. You can do Windows updates. However, if you're a co-managed managed services client, we're going to handle that through our RMM. We can get a lot more custom than this, but you can deploy Windows updates through here. Some other things you can do through Intune for management. This is where you come in and retire a device. Let's say it's offline, never going to be used again. You can retire it. Or user leaves, you want to give them that device. If you retire it, it will remove business data and allow, it'll remove it from Entra, remove it from Intune, allow them to use it still. You can wipe it. You have options when you wipe. This is where you can say wipe the device, keep enrollment state and associated user account, or wipe the device, even if it loses power. So basically, it will continue to make sure it's wiped. If it does lose power, though, it does warn you that it could put the device in an unusable state. You can delete the device if it's been re-imaged, it's not in your inventory anymore. This is where you can force it to sync. Sometimes this works, sometimes this doesn't. Typically, it might take 30 minutes or so once you hit sync. If the device is online, it can force it to sync, look for applications or scripts. You can force the device to restart. Again, unless it's pulling in, it's not going to be immediate. That's where it can be a challenge. Fresh start, this can be helpful. It will remove all preloaded Windows 32 apps, retain the user's data. So sometimes if they're having issues, do a fresh start. Let's say you're giving the machine to a new user. This is where you can do an autopilot reset. Next time we can cover the different scenarios when you'd want to use each. You obviously use Copilot. You can look it up and ask, hey, this particular scenario happened. I'm, wanting to give an existing machine to another user, which is recommended, and it'll tell you the pros and cons of each. And then if you are using Defender, you can do scans from here as well. Some other things you can do. You can rename a device. If you put the name in, you have the ability to force a restart right after you rename, or you can have it to where the next time they reboot, it would get that pending device name You can create categories for your devices. This is something that's custom. Otherwise, everything's unassigned. Device ownership. This is where I was showing earlier. You could flip a device from personal to corporate. It gives you a warning because it does take some control of the device if it was personal. See some hardware information. So you can also see, give me the enrollment, when it was enrolled, how it was enrolled. If you have a managed app, if it's getting it and where it's at in there. What memberships or what groups, device groups that device is a member of. User experience can be helpful. This is a VM that hasn't been around very long, but over time it'll see the startup performance and kind of help determine the battery life. So you know if you may need to reimage the device, or particular maybe if the battery health's awful, you might need to replace it or get a new battery. If you have the BitLocker policy set up correctly, you can see the keys here. And then lapse, I'm hoping we can get to that next time as well. If you have the local password resetting through a lapse policy, this is where you can do that. So I apologize we didn't get to go through as much as I was wanting today, but thank you all very much for your time, and stay tuned. We'll have another one scheduled where you can get a little more in depth on creating custom apps and some of the other settings within Intune we didn't get to today. Thank you very much.